In 1946, Britain gambled $250 million on turning African scrubland into the world's peanut farm. Within 5 years, nearly every penny was gone. The numbers alone don't capture the sheer audacity of what happened next. Right after World War II, Britain faced a crushing problem. It was broke, hungry, and desperate. Rationing at home was worse than during the war itself. And somewhere in Whitehall, a group of powerful men decided the solution wasn't to fix their own economy. It was to remake an entire continent. The scheme was called the East African Groundnut Scheme. Its architects believed, with absolute certainty, that they could convert 3 million acres of Tanganyika's bush into mechanized peanut farms. The vision was simple: grow cheap groundnuts in Africa, ship them back to Britain, solve the food crisis, and make a tidy profit. On paper, it was flawless. In reality, it was a catastrophe waiting to unfold. The British government didn't send a small expedition. They sent an army. Thousands of workers, engineers, and administrators descended on Tanganyika with bulldozers, tractors, and absolute confidence that Western industrial methods could conquer African soil. They arrived in 1946. By 1951, the entire operation had collapsed. What went wrong? Everything. The planners had never actually visited the land they were trying to farm. The soil was nothing like what they'd assumed. It was shallow, laterite, rock-hard when dry, swamp when wet. The rainy seasons didn't match their projections, and the machinery, it broke constantly. Parts that worked fine in England simply couldn't handle the African heat and dust. There was also a human cost nobody wanted to discuss. Local communities were displaced. The scheme promised jobs but delivered chaos. Workers faced impossible conditions, disease, poor management, wages that barely materialized. And the machinery they were meant to operate, often they weren't trained to use it. Sometimes it was simply broken before they ever got the chance. The financial hemorrhaging was staggering. The project started with a budget of around £24 million, an enormous sum for 1946. By year 2, costs had nearly doubled. By year 3, they'd tripled. The British government kept pouring money in, hoping the next harvest would finally turn things around. It never did. What makes this story particularly instructive is the psychology behind it. The planners weren't stupid. Many were brilliant engineers and administrators, but they shared a fatal flaw: unshakable confidence in their own expertise. They believed that British industrial know-how could simply be transplanted to Africa without adaptation. That hubris proved catastrophically expensive. There was also the geopolitical angle. Britain needed dollars, American dollars, to survive. The scheme was partly designed to generate hard currency through exports, but it did the opposite. Instead of earning money, it burned it, and Britain couldn't afford to burn anything. The nation was already on the edge of bankruptcy. By 1950, even the most optimistic officials couldn't deny reality. The groundnut yields were catastrophically low. The machinery was a graveyard of broken equipment scattered across the bush. And the political situation in Britain was becoming untenable. The public was furious. Millions had been wasted on a fantasy. The scheme was formally abandoned in 1951. The final losses came to approximately £36 million, roughly equivalent to $2 billion in today's money. For context, that was about 5% of Britain's entire national budget at the time, poured into African dirt, with almost nothing to show for it. The aftermath was messy. There were inquiries, reports. Blame was distributed among politicians, engineers, and administrators. But the fundamental lesson was buried: massive capital investments backed by ideological certainty and minimal on-the-ground research tend to end badly, very badly. What's striking is how quickly this disaster was forgotten. Within a decade, it had faded from public consciousness. There were no prosecutions, no major reforms. The officials involved moved on to other posts. The financial system that enabled such reckless spending remained intact, waiting for the next ambitious fool with access to a nation's treasury. But here's what makes this case essential to understanding how institutional power actually works. Nobody was acting out of malice. The architects of the scheme believed they were serving their nation. They genuinely thought they could pull it off. Their confidence was their weapon, and it was lethal. The scheme reveals something uncomfortable about how governments allocate capital. When stakes are high and pressure is intense, institutions often double down on bad decisions rather than cut losses. They commit more money, more people, more prestige, hoping to eventually justify the initial investment. It's a pattern we've seen repeat over and over throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. The groundnut scheme stands as a monument to the dangers of institutional overconfidence. It's a masterclass in how expertise, when unchecked by reality, becomes a liability. And it's a reminder that the largest financial disasters aren't always born from fraud or malice. Sometimes they emerge from the sheer certainty of powerful people who have never had to admit they were wrong. For Tanganyika, the legacy was complicated. The scheme failed, but it also accelerated infrastructure development and eventually contributed to the region's path toward independence. For Britain, it was a humbling lesson in the limits of imperial power, though a lesson that took decades to fully sink in. Today, the scheme is rarely discussed outside academic circles. It doesn't fit neatly into narratives of either British achievement or colonial villainy. It's just a cautionary tale: billions in capital, thousands of workers, and years of effort, all directed toward a vision that ignored the actual world it was trying to change. The question that lingers isn't whether it could have been prevented. It's why, given all the evidence and expertise available, nobody stopped it before it consumed $250 million. That's the real story. That's the one we need to understand. Subscribe for more forgotten financial disasters that shaped the modern world. Stories where power, certainty, and capital collide in ways that still echo today.